All right, well, those of you who were panicking a lot and losing your mind throughout these price ranges, you're probably feeling a little bit silly right now, but that is totally fine because trust me, a lot of people are right there with you in that camp. But here we are with Bitcoin looking at a 94K price tag right now. And actually, the more important thing is, of course, the S&P 500, which gapped all the way up. Basically, it did everything I was expecting it to do. I didn't expect it would drop down here first, but other than that, it's done everything we were expecting right here on this YouTube channel. So shout out to those of you that are smashing those likes up and staying subscribed to this YouTube channel because you're getting the best, most realistic ground analysis in the game. What's up? Take a look at this. We're sitting right here at about resistance right now. There's still a little bit left in today's daily session. We're about halfway through it at the time of recording today, and it looks pretty decent, right? It looks like, we've got some potential support down here that we can kind of range, and kind of go sideways a little bit. But otherwise, we back tested the previous all-time high. We've covered this kind of at length now on this YouTube channel. This is one of the bigger ideas that I've been covering with you guys, where we set this all-time high around kind of 2022, and then about 3 years later, we're back here to kind of back test it. So with that kind of back test, establishing an uptrend, setting higher lows, setting higher highs, we're in a really, really good place. We haven't quite done all of that yet. We haven't actually set any higher highs yet. You could argue that this was a high and then we've actually surpassed it. So I guess actually, yeah, we have set a higher high, but really we need to get above this high right here, which sits at about kind of 5470. If the S&P 500 can get there, then we're looking at about 5600. And the reason that all of that is important, of course, is because Bitcoin is not going to move up without the blessing of the S&P 500. We've had, some discussions of decoupling and how Bitcoin is no longer kind of dependent on the S&P 500 and stuff like that. And I can understand why people are saying that, but I don't think that those claims have a lot of kind of backing. I don't think there's enough evidence to suggest that that's the case. And ultimately, it's like I said on this YouTube channel many, many times now, especially on live streams. Those of you that kind of tune in live, you're going to know this quite well. The way these markets move, it's the same people that are putting money in the S&P 500, that are putting money in the stock market, that are also putting money in Bitcoin and so on, right? And so they've got similar strategies, they've got similar ideas, and that's why we're seeing that, it's like I said, Bitcoin won't move up without the blessing of the S&P 500. It doesn't mean that the S&P 500 has to move up first, but it needs the blessing of it, and I think that's a really important kind of nuance. But yeah, a nice little kind of setup here. If the S&P 500 goes down a little bit, then we might see Bitcoin coming down, and we'll get to that in just a second. But if not, then it's looking pretty good right now. It's looking exactly like kind of what you would want. If we take a look at Bitcoin though, and kind of analyze what's been going on here, this is a really interesting chart. It's actually the first time that we've really had something clear for a while. And it kind of started over here. It started in this range that we were covering on this YouTube channel. I told you guys that this would be a phenomenal long, and look at that. It's just flown up to its current price is up by about 11%, up to its high, it's up by about 12.6, which is absolutely fantastic. Just huge gains being made there for those of you that have been kind of active in this market, taking some longs up. And if you're looking for a place to trade, then the best places are linked in the description down below. You've got Bybit and OKX being two of the most respected exchanges in the game, and OKX has been around for a really long time. They're still currently partnered with McLaren, and they've got an exchange interface that you're completely used to, but also great off-ramp capabilities for those of you, for example, in the UAE, which I think is really, really cool. And they've got a Web3 wallet. There's just a lot going on. Check them out. They are really, really good. And you can find them with the link in the description. With all of these links, when you sign up and start trading, you're going to be getting bonuses. But always bear in mind that if you're from a restricted region, you will not be allowed to use these platforms, and you should not mess with the law in your country. So definitely make sure that you are compliant. But by the way, look at Trump coin right here. It came all the way up to $16 from a low of around kind of like 9. It just absolutely pumped through, and this is kind of why you don't want to be getting your hands in shorts on kind of illiquid meme coins. You can definitely make a lot of money if you do it right, but you just got to have your stops in place. You got to have your take profits kind of going, because otherwise a move like this is kind of always going to happen. Let's just see if it's happened on Melania yet, just out of curiosity. Yeah, it has. It's also happened on Melania, and this is Melania is an even better example, because this is kind of like one of those forever shorts that like if you felt like it would go on forever, then you're kind of fooling yourself. But obviously the market humbles you, so it's no problem. But back to Bitcoin here. I want to break down what we're seeing right here before we carry on with alts, because there's so much to talk about in today's video. If you are finding it useful so far, do me a favor and smash those likes up. The algorithm's been very dirty to us recently, ladies and gents. So anything does go a really, really long way. It does help a lot. Thank you very much. But taking a look at this range, we've obviously got a little bit of support down here in the very low 90s, about 90.91. I think that that's definitely an area that Bitcoin could find some support at. I think an even better zone of support for Bitcoin is going to be 88, just because of how much we've tested it recently. I don't know if we're going to come down, but I'll tell you what, we can start drawing some fibs on this chart to kind of make a little bit of sense of what's going on. And actually, we've got this really long-term fib real quick. Let's just take a look at this one. This one's been drawn from the absolute kind of low by the looks of it. No. It was drawn. Yeah, that's right. It was drawn from here. So 618 golden pocket. Yeah, we front ran that. That's absolutely beautiful. 382 resistance. That lines up with 88. That makes complete sense. And we're kind of getting rejected at 236. So look at that. This is a chart that we've had drawn for a really, really long time. What I want to do is I want to actually put a more local fib on this right now, and kind of see what it's looking like from this perspective. And just look at this, by the way. Just, again, this is going to depend a little bit on what kind of chart you're looking at right now. This is the Bybit chart, but we are seeing that Bitcoin kind of more or less just topped out exactly where it topped out previously. And I think that's a really big deal because, we were talking about how we really need to get above this level to kind of set a new macro kind of higher high. We haven't quite done that yet, but we're so close. And, we're not in a rush, right? Like this can take a little bit of time and it would be no problem at all. So I think that's also pretty cool. If we do take a look at, the fib at this kind of range, I think things could get very, very interesting. I haven't actually done this yet, but let's go ahead and do that. So we're just zooming in onto the hourly to kind of see a little bit more of the intimate price action here. And big retracement down to kind of 87. A lot of support down here. That does make some sense. And then we've got the 236. It doesn't actually look super, super, super reliable to me right here. What I also want to do is actually draw this up to the all-time high. And see we've got the 382 kind of giving us a bit of so I'm not seeing a lot here as far as fibs go, but it definitely still validates the kind of resistance range that we were expecting. We talked about this a lot on yesterday's live stream. And it's just this box right here, right? Like, for Bitcoin, it can get above this high, but it doesn't really matter if it struggles in this box. So we're going to have to see how Bitcoin behaves around here. If it is able to kind of really conclusively get above this box, then, it's going to be kind of crazy. But, before that happens, it's kind of just still resistance. And there's still potential for a bull trap as well. I want to kind of make sure that that's kind of, conscious with you guys. A lot of people are just look at this. We're it's a little bit silly, right? From 47 to 72 in one day. We're clearly kind of shifting pretty quickly in terms of sentiment, and that's not good, right? Like that's going to be an indication that a pullback might come. I think a lot of us are probably expecting a pullback anyway, because up in a straight line like this doesn't really make sense. You always get pullbacks. Not always, but typically you kind of generally do. And so I think it's important to kind of discuss where that might go. We've already looked at fibs and there wasn't a whole lot there, but other indicators are definitely giving us some more clarity. This 4-hour Ichimoku cloud, which I absolutely love, now stretches right up to about 89K and starts at about 85, so 84. So, just no surprises there. Really, really nice kind of level for Bitcoin to kind of retrace into at this point. We're also seeing the same thing from the EMA ribbon. It's kind of at the same place right now. On the daily, it's also all curving up and turning bullish right here. So, unfortunately, these are quite late signals. That's why you don't want to use them, but they can validate your analysis if you're like, are you sure that we're kind of moving up? Well, here's a sign, right? Like you can fade these signs as much as you like. There's this sign, there's going to be another one, there's going to be another one. You can fade them, you can ignore them as much as you like, but eventually, it's to me, I kind of view these as like, look, it's just a sign, right? And if there are enough signs and you're still not changing your mind, then you're either like fucking Michael Burry, like the guy, the Big Short, who just like shorted the entire market at the top in '08, or you're a little bit stupid, or both, because Michael Burry, for all of his credit that he deserves, he was way too prematurely bearish in this economy here. And, a lot of people followed him because they're sheep. But this is why I say you really want to kind of pay attention to less people, pay attention to less opinion pieces and so on, because it's just going to muddy your analysis. You're better off kind of doing this on your own, even if you don't feel confident in yourself. There's ways that you can fit. That's an issue that you have to address, right? Like if you don't feel confident in yourself, the solution is not to go and fucking, like copy a bunch of people that you found on the internet. The solution is to learn something, right? I know that it sounds difficult, but you're in the game of trading. Your competition is quite fierce. You can be a bitch about it if you want to, but your competition isn't, and they're going to take your money. Okay, so I've been doing this for over 10 years. I've seen this every single way that somebody can play this, and I just know that the best way to handle these markets is to be independent, and learn things on your own. It sounds tough because it is, right? Trading is not going to be easy, and if you think it is, then Oh my God, may as well just, probably may as well just cash out your money now, right? So that you don't have to suffer the 80% loss you're invariably going to see. But anyway, changing subjects, here's Solana. In fact, no, I shouldn't change subjects yet. Let's keep on Bitcoin just for a second. Bitcoin's done exactly what we were expecting. I was saying that, once Bitcoin kind of gets above this level, it's probably going to be a pretty quick rise up. And we've more or less kind of done that now. We were also ranging a little bit and, just kind of doing a little bit of kind of price discovery in this range. Only a little bit because we've already done a little bit before. But for the most part, I would probably expect, especially considering that we had this kind of shallow test here, that we might be able to get back up into this box. Obviously, like I said, breaking this box might be a problem. So we might kind of, do this a little bit, and just kind of go sideways here for a little bit. And again, I think that a lot of that is also going to be dependent on the S&P 500, right? I think that if the S&P 500 takes another shit, then that's probably going to drag Bitcoin lower, even though a lot of people are kind of rightly suggesting that Bitcoin is kind of front running the S&P 500 right now. Again, it's like I said, that wouldn't be possible in an environment where, there wasn't at least some kind of baseline level of optimism for the S&P 500. I put it differently, if the S&P 500 was really crashing really, really hard, we'd probably see Bitcoin doing the same thing. I don't think that, there's any argument that's reasonable to make that, kind of crypto is leading traditional finance because, it just doesn't hold up, right? If we go to the kind of global market cap of everything, crypto is just not that big, right? I think that's a really important thing that we've got to that we've got to be aware of here. 1.9 trillion for Bitcoin here. It just isn't. I mean, like here's just one company. Like in the US, worth $3 trillion. There's another one, 2.8, 2.5. You know what I mean? Like these are, So I don't. I think crypto itself is too small to kind of lead anything. Because it's also the cumulative effect, right? Like all of these companies are kind of, contributing to stocks and so on. I just don't see it that, a tiny, speculative fucking crime market like crypto, basically, which, because that's what it is. I don't see how that could kind of, lead the entire world. So very much more of a blessing situation than, a kind of front running in my view, that is. I could be completely wrong about this, of course. But, I think that's kind of what we're seeing there. Of course, if Bitcoin, like I said, can get above this, then we're kind of looking at all-time highs, which could get really, really interesting. But unless that happens, we're in this range now, and that's just what we're dealing with. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. Now, Bitcoin's dominance has been a little bit of whiplash for Bitcoin's dominance over the last kind of day or so. It's went all the way up to kind of 64.6, but then all the way back down to kind of 64.2. The bottom line is that even if your alts are up, unless you're in Trump coin and unless you bought very recently, you're still fucked, and you're not in a better position. I mean, like I guess against the dollar, you're kind of doing a little bit better, but overall, you're still, really not in a good place if you're kind of heavy in alts at the moment. And I don't really see a sign of this changing. Like, I'll be honest, I got a little bit of FOMO just looking at these prices because I saw this pump coming and, we were looking at this, we were live, we were making videos, you were here, you saw it, right? So I saw these altcoins and I was like, shit, I kind of wish I was in these. But the bottom line is that these are kind of short-lived pumps, right? I got a really good question on yesterday's live stream about when are we seeing a real alt season? And that's the important question to ask because, by the way, I just realized I've been like very poorly lit for the entire video. There we go. That should be a little bit better now. You can see me a little bit better. I got a really good question about, when are we going to get a real alt season? I think that's important, right? Because you're going to get, a lot of little kind of rallies along the way, 10% even, they can be big, but, this doesn't mean that these coins are back, right? I mean, the Bitcoin dominance chart is kind of the big one to look at in these contexts, and it's just, it's just not reversing yet, right? And to be honest, I think it might have to reverse at, a kind of important level. I guess you could argue that this is, somewhat important. We had a little bit of resistance, a little bit of support back here, but, it's pretty clear that the kind of reversal range is kind of in the low 70s. Now, like I said, I don't know if we're going to get there, but it looks pretty likely at this stage that we will. And, if we do, then that means a lot more pain for altcoin. Again, you might gain against the dollar, but that doesn't really matter if you could have been positioned in Bitcoin and saved your Bitcoin balance, because you're going to lose Bitcoin even if you gain dollars, and that's very counterintuitive. We're not here for dollars. That's kind of why we entered crypto. Even if you feel like Bitcoin's a little bit too big for you at this stage, and maybe it pulls a 2-3x where you're not getting rich off that, which is totally reasonable. I agree with you. That's true. we still need to understand that there's a lot less risk in Bitcoin than there is in altcoins, and if you're not getting paid for the additional risk that you're taking, and if that payment that you're getting, if it's not completely asymmetric, and if you're not getting way more than you risked, then it's not really worth it. In my view, at least, I'm just kind of being very real with you guys, right? Because we've also got other instruments like leverage where like we don't need to take on that additional risk in altcoins. We can still trade Bitcoin, which is relatively safe, and then we can just multiply those gains, right? And that's obviously where I think things get really interesting. But again, definitely check out those links in the description if you are interested in all that. You get some really, really cool bonuses when you do start deploying your capital using these links in the description. But like I said, only make sure that you do it if you're not from a restricted region. But yeah, that's kind of Bitcoin's dominance. I think one of the big charts to kind of read to kind of evaluate Bitcoin's dominance is going to be Ethereum against Bitcoin, and it's just taken another shit here and bounced up. Look, like this thing can bounce up by, a lot, right? Like it's done it before. We've seen, fairly large bounces here. This was a 27% and happened in about 2.5 weeks, right? So we could totally get, kind of big bounces here on Ethereum, but it's still like I think it's gonna have to do something pretty impressive to kind of make me feel interested in this at the moment. To be honest, it's at a really good buy level. It is at a really good buy level, and I think that buying it at this level long term, it'd be hard to lose money, right? I'm not saying that it's gonna work. I don't know. I can't see the future, but I think it'd be hard to lose money if you kind of just buy it, especially against Bitcoin. I'm saying against Bitcoin. Against the dollar, it's slightly more ambiguous, but it's still pretty clear to me. And so I just feel like, this is going to be a kind of interesting one to watch. If it truly, truly, truly was the reversal, you probably would see some more kind of significant moves up. But just because that hasn't happened yet, that doesn't mean it can't happen. That can totally happen today. That can happen tomorrow. It can happen soon. There's definitely a setup for that to happen right now. And so, if you're kind of like looking for a little bit of kind of confirmation to tell you, what to do with your capital, then, I don't think the market's fully given that to us yet, but it could be coming soon. So I think that's interesting. Obviously, a lot of people are still sidelined. And, I've covered this before. A lot of people kind of sold expecting things to get really, really bad. And, the risk is that you probably didn't buy back in because you were expecting low 70s or 60s, right? Those people are sidelined now. They're, Bitcoin's potentially higher than where they sold. Maybe not. Maybe it's kind of break even. But the bottom line is, to me, kind of taking risk out of these markets, unless there's a really good reason, to me, it just doesn't really make sense. I don't like to do it. I feel like, like I said, I've been doing this for over 8 years. Bitcoin always goes up. That might change. It could change now. I don't think it's going to change. And because I don't think it's going to change, I feel like it's just always safer to kind of have that exposure rather than, say that, maybe I get a 20% better entry, but then you just miss the whole fucking train because of it. Like that would be where greed can kind of trip you up a little bit. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind here. But let's take a look at Trump coin. Obviously, kind of one of the more interesting coins today with all of the volatility. If we do just take a look at Trump coin right here, it's just blasted through resistance at $10. Clearly, some liquidations happening here. I don't know if this is because people love Trump again. I wouldn't say that. Even though, there's been a lot of kind of reversals on tariff talks and stuff like that. Look, I'm not a Trump hater at all. I'm also not a Trump dick rider. But I think that I'm curious to find out exactly what's happened here, because I think that there's, a lot of people saying like there was just so much drama, and for what, right? Like to what end? Like what did it achieve? And I think these are really kind of, important questions to be asking. But, to kind of brush it all off and say that this was totally unnecessary and the US gained nothing, I think is also foolish. You need to have a slightly more nuanced look. If all that this achieved is it reset the markets a little bit to put them in a healthier place to continue moving up, and it gave the United States better leverage to negotiate in general, which I think both statements are completely true, then this was still worth it. It depends who you ask, but it was probably still worth it. But I think that those kind of discussions are important. But like I said, I don't know how this has any bearing on kind of Trump's price action in and of itself. What I do know is, it's a game of, seeing where resistance is, right? Now that we're above some levels, this does get a little bit more interesting. It's kind of like Hypecoin. You can start kind of looking for, back tests of important levels, right? If the market kind of takes a big shit right now, then, it's totally reasonable to expect, a 30% kind of drop right here on Trump coin. That would, definitely make some sense here. And that would, kind of put Trump right back into some nice kind of juicy price ranges here. And I did mention Hypecoin. Let's take a quick look at that. I know that that's been getting a lot of attention here in this market. It's got this really nice support down here at about $15. I was kind of looking to see it come down to this level again, but that didn't end up happening. I was also looking to see it come down to 12. That also didn't end up happening. So this is definitely a market with a little bit of legs right now. But it's up against macro resistance right now, like pretty severe resistance. I mean, bear in mind this chart's only existed for a few months, so there is not a lot here. And obviously it's going to broadly be dependent on the rest of the market, but as we can see, definitely, a range that could present some challenges for hype, and that's why I think that the possibility of kind of getting better prices is not too slim at this stage. I think that we definitely do still have a chance of getting better prices at some point. Take a look at these kind of fib retracements. We've got the 382 level right here at about $15.40. We've got the 618 golden pocket at about kind of $12-13. So, definitely some kind of retracements that hype can have here. I know that we don't like to entertain these kind of retracements at times like this, but that doesn't matter. That's not going to stop me from spitting the truth right here on this YouTube channel. You know what to do if you do love that stuff right here. Let's take a look at a couple others. We got XRP started to make a little bit of a move up, but it's just going to move in its own time. It's probably it looks like it wants to reclaim this range, especially given the fact that it did so well over here. It definitely might want to kind of reclaim the top of this range here. So we'll have to see how that continues to go. XRP against Bitcoin, still strong. It's one of the only ones that is strong. So that's pretty cool. Dogecoin doing absolutely nothing. It's up by a little bit, but nothing particularly interesting here. Cardano, let's look at Cardano right here. Yeah, kind of same thing. I think a lot of these coins now are kind of, they're just going to be at the same kind of place. So, I think, kind of bull comes back into the court of Bitcoin. I want to look at a couple of others, actually. I know that there's some that have really, really kind of been trending lately. Let's look at Fartcoin, because I think Fart was kind of one of the barometers of the entire altcoin market. I'm sorry, the meme coin market in general, and it's got a nice big breakout here, 18%, about 26% at a high, and not so easy to read this chart. I mean, it's not so clear about kind of where resistance could be, but what's very clear is that there is this huge cup. You do typically get your handle, but that handle could also form up here or up here. So holding your breath for that handle might not be the best strategy either. It's just one of those coins where I don't think that there's a hugely kind of logical argument that you could make to buy any of these coins, but some people are still going to be interested in them anyway, and they're not really going to have much kind of technical reasoning to get in, other than the fact that it's going up, and if that's good enough for you, then that's good enough for you. Me personally, even though I think that these kind of ideas can definitely make money in crypto, I like to be a little bit more clinical with my money. I'm trading, I got a real amount of money that I'm, that's important to me. I wouldn't want to, just kind of like throw it in to just kind of random stuff. And because of that, I feel like things need to be a little bit more kind of intentional and deliberate than, just market buying Fartcoin because, my friend said it might go up. You know what I mean? Like, that's not really how I do things, but it works for a lot of people. It definitely does work, but for me, I want to be in much more direct control of my destiny, and that's why I look at things like Bitcoin right here. And to me, we're in this range. We've got support here at kind of 91. We got even better support down here at about 88. Either of these two levels, I think, are really, really good buys for Bitcoin right now, and I'm definitely interested in kind of bidding at these levels. And then resistance up here. Also, we got to see what happens with the stock market and what happens with Trump, right? It looks like Trump's kind of being a little bit nicer to China right now. I think that's why we're seeing this. I think that's why we're seeing gold dump as well. So yeah, we just got to kind of see how this continues to play out right here. But I really hope you have enjoyed this video. You know what to do. If you have, smash up those likes, subscribe, tick the bell, do all that really, really good stuff. You got some phenomenal links in the description if you are allowed to in your local, with your country if you're not from a restricted region, according to your local laws and regulations. Definitely check all that stuff out. If you want to get into our free Telegram channel with more free analysis posted around the clock from my team and I, then definitely check out this link right here. And yeah, we'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.